So, hello to our members again, and thank you for joining us on our last uh, lecture of our series. And we're joined by Diego from DFDC, and we're super excited to hear what he's got to say. So I'll keep this short and shut up now and put myself on mute and pass over to Diego to start his wee presentation.
Good. Ready?
Yep, perfect. If you want to go ahead.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks very much to everyone at 5710 for the kind invitation. We very much hope we could have delivered this brief lecture in person with all of you in Scotland, also because it's been quite some years since I've been up there. But anyway, it's no one's decision. So hopefully this remote lecture that unfortunately we're all getting used to will be okay. This lecture, I mean, every time we're invited to deliver a lecture, me and Dario have the obvious conversation about what it should be about and what sort of topics or ideas it should convey, but at the same time we ask ourselves, how much in depth or what the contents should be, in comparison to any eventual information that nowadays is not very difficult to get, for example, from visiting our website and all of that. So we're of the idea that it's better to maybe not maybe try not to say too much or go too much in depth into one or two projects, but actually try to provide the kind of thing that it's more difficult to obtain just by reviewing information out there. So in light of this, what I'll be briefly talking about are three topics or three points that we think are important in our practice, but also in our role as teachers of architecture at the Kingston School of Architecture in London. First of all, I'm going to start by giving a brief premise or introduction about our work before we get onto these 3 points. A couple of years ago, when we were in a similar situation of having to prepare a lecture, we came up this image on the left, which is a painting by Goya, a Spanish painter, already some years back, something like 105 years ago, called the Forge, and it basically shows three characters in the industrial process of forging some metal object over an anvil of some sort. For what I care, I'm not that interested in what the object they are working on is, but more the setup and the action that the painting captures. There is this idea about the limit in architecture that is both an idea, but it's also an element of architecture that there's no doubt that it exists, and that it's one of the key components of architecture. The idea that there's something that we call the limit, and it's something that is what is between two separate regions or two separate spatial elements, or even the constructive elements that in a more tectonic way determine something like a wall or a floor. So this idea of a separation, architecture relying on a not only relying, but having the task of creating a limit. And one of the things we like about this image is how this, in order to create an object, this thing that might be very thin, and you can see it's red hot on the image, and it's the only way you can forge it. You can give it some sort of shape or form. It's through an incredible amount of almost violent action. You can see the guy with the tool. Probably the three of them are hitting this object with a brutal amount of force, and they have an idea in mind, and they have come up with a plan of forming this kind of objects. And the reason why we're showing it is because we relate it to the role of the architect. As sometimes we like to think of ourselves as people with a very refined set of skills that we can go to our desk or our computers and work out something that comes from an idea through a series of elegant steps and elegant moves. Whereas in reality, at least, it's what I can only speak for myself or our practice. But actually, the process is much more similar to something like this, almost a process where the one needs to have an idea, but also one needs to have an incredible amount of determination and force to give shape to it. So these guys would miserably fail if they try to give form to this metal object by just attempting very careful and very soft moves onto it. So I guess I'm trying to talk about the thing about having an idea and the vision for something, but also the almost the physical process required to give shape to it. This was a result of a conversation, almost a casual or completely fortuitous conversation between Dario Franchini, my other professional half, and myself. And then soon after, we realized we found this image or this sketch or study that looked conspicuously similar to it. But then we realized, and also we read the title for it, that these guys, probably the same characters or three other guys that look quite similar to the first ones, in reality are digging a hole. So in this study that probably precedes the one on the left, we see three guys again with through the composition of the image, we see the drama of this very physically requiring action or performance, but this time not forging a man-made object, but creating a hole on the ground. So we're talking about a topographic intervention that is not something new, but it's clearly related to a context. Whereas on the one on the left, someone has asked them to create an object for some sort of functional use. On the second one, they're doing the opposite, and they're modifying the landscape or the context around them, again through something requiring an incredible amount of force and effort. So all of these ideas I'm about to put out there for you guys is we're trying to bind them within this word of between. We always try to find a keyword for our lectures, maybe not a very sophisticated title, but something that allows not only the people who might be listening to this, but also allow us to somehow structure the kind of activities that we do every day in the office or with our students, with with like a certain perspective or optics that might bind it in a way or another. So just to give a brief background, because I assume no one knows anything about us, and rightly so. Dario and I met while studying at the Accademia d'Architettura in Mendrisio in Switzerland back in, well, too long ago, probably 2003, around that time. Dario is Swiss. He was born and raised in the Ticino region, the Italian-speaking region of Switzerland, where the university is based. And I was born and I grew up in Mexico, and this was my first experience in Europe, and of course my main the main part of my education as an architect. We were incredibly lucky in being able to be taught by some of the architects that we admire the most. But also what was really important in our formation was that even though the school has a very strong vision of, it's a relatively recent school, I think it was founded 20 years ago, on the vision of some, the local heroes of the region, which I'm sure you have heard about, and based on the view and the vision of architecture, already in an advanced part of their life when the school started. The idea for the school was that it should nevertheless be even if it was in a really small town, one might say in the middle of nowhere, for a really strong international presence, not only in terms of students, but also in terms of the professors and the tutors. So it was both a school with a very clear view based on the reading of the territory as a point of departure for whatever architecture one might end up making. But on the other one, it had there was an inherent forum for voices of almost any sort, without any fear or any preoccupation about dissonance or potential conflict of visions of architecture. So we think we were very lucky in being formed under that context. I don't know, I mean, the territorial condition of Switzerland is really interesting here when we're not talking about the main cities, and which are a bit not particularly close to here. But the most interesting element of the territory within which we were formed was not the cities themselves, but actually was everything that was in between the medium-sized cities, the territory per se. And in this particular case, you have this image of Switzerland as this very mountainous country and landscape. And really, it's the infrastructures and this what this sketch on the left tries to represent is that the space is created, or the spatial condition of Switzerland is given by the continuous intersection and permutations between the different infrastructures, and not only natural elements like the mountains and the lakes mainly, but also the highways and the cantonal roads and the railway. This will hopefully become a bit more apparent in the next part with our projects. So this is more or less who we are. And then after I graduated, I moved to London, a place I have never lived in, to work, precisely for one of my old tutors in Switzerland. And at that point, in a way, this sort of Swiss urban or territorial culture that I had developed an affinity or a sensibility for in my years as student. Suddenly, I landed in this completely, almost diametrically contrasting territory, which is the UK and which is England in another level, and then London. So this is perhaps the last part of the cultural element in our practice, that this created the basis for what we later became as a practice, and the kind of, even though we don't think about this kind of things every day, it's mostly when we need to present who we are to other people, it becomes really evident that there are like 3 or 4 key, I don't know if to call them cultures or cultural identities that consciously or unconsciously determine our vision of architecture and hopefully our production. As you can see on the left, this is the archetypal Swiss or Ticino urban context, which is based on like the evolution of the agricultural field, which means in very simple terms that everyone has got a plot, and there's a very clear limit between the plots, and then if you want to build a house in your plot, then it means you need to, depending on which village or town you are, you need to basically draw an offset from the limits, and then you are more or less free to build your freestanding building. And this, of course, is this decision alone, or this planning and territorial vision, is the most important and the most determinant in the development of a context like the Swiss one. Then I won't spend much time talking about the opposite case, which is the UK or London in particular, where so to put it in simplistic terms, the Victorian context is quite the opposite, no? And it's a vision of the city as made up by larger composite elements, in which the unit of the city, which is the house, most of the times belongs to is part of a larger structure, which might be the terrace or the crescent or the etc. etc. So again, clearly, when we have to, we get new clients and we need to develop projects, we need to, depending on where we are, clearly one of these 2 paradigms of space becomes more relevant or more active than the other. But still, even when we work in one context or the other, there's always a bit of this mix or this composite view of not only the territory but also of the essence, the essential unit of the city. Probably I should have said this first, but we have 2 offices. So we have an office in London, which I lead, and Dario, my partner, is mostly based in the Swiss studio, which is in Lugano or outside Lugano. And before this crazy situation we're living, we used to travel a lot, and that was the idea from the beginning, to have basically to be based in the place where we live, but to have this practice that from the beginning relied on a very particular type of collaboration, which means video calls and even WhatsApp. So for us, it's not something that happened like COVID a bit unexpectedly and after some years, but our practice was founded on this displacement and in this being able to be in two different sides, in 2 different cultures, and somehow finding a way of actually not finding a way of producing architecture, but actually using that exact condition as the groundwork for architecture. Clearly now it's not it's not a choice of ours, but our traveling has been reduced to zero almost, and in this case we are happy that our practice was founded on this ability of not being sitting next to each other in order to have meaningful dialogues and conversations. So all of these slightly loose ingredients I'm giving to you is what we think is behind our identity as architects or our method. We don't think we don't claim to have a strong and codified method in what we do. But this doesn't mean that consciously or subconsciously there is something that maybe defines us or distinguishes us from any others, which is, of course, completely normal. We are all the result of the conditions and the constraints that we around us. So the idea for the practices from the beginning, or for the practice, was that there wasn't like a main office and the other was the branch of it, but actually there were two things that, or one thing that happened to be based in two contexts. Something we discovered with time was that the kind of people we were very, I would like to say, young and small team, but it's incredibly interesting how the type of or the individual characters of people that have that collaborate or have collaborated in our office in these years, play an incredible effect on what we end up producing as part of the following stage. So just say that every person who joins the office becomes like 25% of the identity and the human capital of the practice, which is there are many downsides of leading a small practice, but this is quite an interesting phenomenon. I think that we are much more reactive or much more fluid, I think, in terms of our the way we, not only the architecture we make, but the way we look at things based on the collaborators we have at any given time. So the first of these 3 points I want to discuss is what we call the elements in time. For each of these points, I'm going to use 2 projects. So to avoid going into a more monographic or anthological description of our work, I'm going to say, I'm going to present 2 projects at a time and trying to read them exclusively from this given like mode or perspective. So this one is elements in time. Here, I guess the thing that interests us is how even though architecture is something that can only be done in the present, there is a clear longevity, or there is a clear opportunity to consider the longevity of constructive and spatial elements as part of the design process. And this, needless to say, is a weird relationship with sustainability, because we don't tend to, or we try not to talk about the more conventional optics or ways of contributing to it, even though we of course have to observe it. But actually we try to find things a bit more, I wouldn't say hidden, but maybe not as evident in the realm of buildings and in the processes of design to identify how we can make buildings that really recognize a need. The buildings are not conceived as something that you build over the process of 2 years and then they go and they have a duration or a lifespan that one day in 50 years the whole building suddenly has become obsolete. Although this is never the case, we try to for these 2 projects, I'm going to show one of them is a very recently completed block of flats, dwellings outside Lugano. It's got a place called Paradise. Lake Lugano in Ticino in Switzerland, and the other one is a terrace house we completed a couple of years ago in northwest London. Good. So yeah, the idea with this building on the left was to, from the beginning, have a very clear vision of how different elements, I mean, namely, how long should again, this is not an invention of ours, this is just us trying as architects to have a conscience for the something as obvious almost as the duration of things, and try to bring that into the design process in a way that allowed us then for the building to respond in a much more codified way in the topics of lifespan and obsolescence. That's the way you say that word. So basically, in this building, we said, look, the structure as designed will probably go for between 70 and 100 years. And the structure, the bones of the building, it's quite an exoskeletal building, as you can see, should go for this amount of years. Then the services within it, the installations, and all of that will probably go for 50 years. And after 50 years, in one way or another, there will need to be a full overhaul or almost revolution within the building to not make those years of those remaining years of lifespan of the structure to be wasted. And then we realized that the facade elements, as a building built in this day and age, will probably go for 30 years. It depends on many factors, but this is the values that we have considered and used. And once one is inside the building, it's probably more something like 10 to 15 years or 20 years that the elements within will probably, for one reason or for more than one type of reasons, would need to be replaced or to be modified. The project on the right, as you can see, is your everyday Victorian Terrace. It is a semi-detached house actually, and here the idea of how these elements that form part of most buildings or architectural events in the world, what we can do as architects to render it useful in time, with of course preserving as much of the existing structure as possible, but also planning a bit the time at which the building will probably have reached the end of its life. So actually this is a good example of I wouldn't say maybe the everyday at the office, but the type of different scales and different locations and geographies, and also types of clients that that form the basis of our practice. And we think we are a particular practice in that respect, in that we're involved in large projects, sometimes very large, but at the same time, this duality allows us to, we have the flexibility to continue working on smaller, very, very localized projects that the normality is the type of projects that when one grows as a practice or takes some steps, then it's the kind of thing that probably you stop doing. So yeah, with this idea of elements in time, what we have tried to do is to identify the structure of the building, the element of the building as a system that is likely to go or should go for the longest duration, is how to then try to make an effort in consolidating then or having a clear view on how what kind of thing beyond the primary structure of a building, namely say the partitions or the way in which the individual spaces are created, how they can be the complete opposite, and how in 20 years, 25 years time, that probably it might not be a physical reason of decay that they will need to be replaced, but it might be a change in the, you know, in the market, or a change in the way we work or live in our private spaces. I mean, and we couldn't. I think no one can claim to need a better example of the kind of situation we're living now. So who knows what might happen over a longer, you know, lifespan. And in this respect, we're trying to, the idea is that the structure is almost, what can be the word? Anyway, it can be taken to one extreme by taking only the form and the shape that that allows it to carry out its function in the most stable way, and then almost planning for a lightweightness or a flexibility for the other elements, what's called maybe the secondary and tertiary structure, that maybe separates a bathroom from a living room, or just contains the vital elements within a house, how we wash our clothes, how we cook, and all of that. And so these projects, however different they are in scale and type of client and markets and all of that, they have an appreciation for this almost internal tectonics, at how through elements perhaps more related to the realm of furniture and furnishings, allow for the building to, first of all, to have a more flexible use in the present, but also to almost have an instructions manual of how it can be, or it will certainly require to change in a matter of a few decades. So for example, in the Paradiso project, this is a scheme showing the vision of the structure. No? So you can see the load-bearing structure is in part on the bottom a skeleton, a spine on the back reacting to the side, and then we have these chunky cores with the services. So basically, buildings need drainage and need supply of water and all of that, and the more concentrated this can be as part of almost like an urban plan at the scale of the building itself. The more a more lightweight and flexible scheme or element of the system, which the diagram on the bottom shows, can complete the space and render a building usable. But it's hopefully quite evident how one can merge rooms, or how can one merge two flats just by displacing the lighter elements in it. So this happens. I mean, you must be aware with regulations in the UK that now ask for dwellings to have, depending on the type of dwellings they are, to be able to make a bathroom accessible just by knocking through a wall or something like that. This kind of attitude we try to take not as an anecdote or an additional functionality of the building, but actually to take it to the essence of how space is formed. You can see the typologies are a bit peculiar at first sight, but they both the constraints of the site, that you will see in another image now, how this is a site constrained by the cantonal road and the railway, how these untypical typologies, so to speak, really emerge from this vision of architecture. And in the other case, in the case of the terrace house, it's the opposite. The setting for the project is a type of space, a human manufact that probably we count by the millions only in a city like London, and it's a kind of architecture that defined an era and that was probably one of the biggest developments of space in the world, following the Victorian pattern books and the Victorian paradigm of creating houses for a city. The way in which we illustrate this principle is just by making a relatively modest extension, physical extension, which might be 9 square meters more to the footprint of the house. In reality, is then what or the way in which the functions, which are quite virtually the same for most houses. You know, we need to cook, and then we need a place to eat where what we have just cooked, and then there's a process of washing stuff and all of that. Well, how in the smallest setting, which is probably the dwelling, how we can, through these elements of furniture and the arrangement of them, how we can endow an existing structure and all the embodied energy that it has, just to build something, the amount of energy contained in the structure, the gray energy, how we can with the, I wouldn't say with the slightest of interventions, but with a relatively small intervention in comparison to the amount of energy, of gray energy, that can be preserved just by doing so. So in this case, it's incredibly simple now. It's by uniting the typical elements of a house, which might be the kitchen and the staircase and a utility cupboard or area, in one single object of one single joinery element, which is this one on the right. That it's not only a functional thing, that it contains all these little elements of our everyday lives, but actually it acquires almost a character and a tectonics of its own through this untypical association of functions. And it's as simple as that. Just by consolidating all these elements, then the rest of the space is liberated for a flexible use that can be space can be reconfigured just by pushing or pulling furniture around it, knowing that the things that ground the space are out of the way in a relatively efficient package. So here we see the two different, how in the Swiss context or in the UK one, well, how there are elements, for example, the steel frame on the right is almost a direct translation of the bow window that used to be there. And in order to plug in this extension to the house, it means that a replacement structural element needs to come in. So this remains almost like the trace of the Victorian typology in this part of the house, where it had to be modified for this new plan. And in the case of the left, we have this. This is one of the. You can see the exposed concrete ceilings as part of this incredibly strong primary structure that we try to keep as finishes wherever it's possible, in comparison to these partitions, which are not typical partitions, but belong more to the world of furniture, and they integrate sliding elements and storage and all of that. So this is one of these cases how one single vision, how one single interest, better put to words, can result in quite contrasting interventions, but still with a shared curiosity on how we can think of space in this more strategic way, rather than a purely compositional or purely about efficiency and beauty, as might be the case. Well, this is a sequence of plans of this of the housing project, starting with the parking and all the storage areas. It's a building that, due to its topography, has like two or three floor plans, ground floor levels. So you can access it depending on if you're driving or if you come walking from the main road, you access it at different heights. But in any case, without going too much into depth, you see on the right how these typologies of the units of the houses themselves are very untypical, but they are the direct result of this intention, of flexibility and a clear vision of how they're dismembering a building in 3 or 4 key components, and acknowledging them that they will stop working at different times, and we need to be ready to for the next phase in their lives. And we think there's a lot of wouldn't say sustainability as a hot word, but there's a clear interest in the energy that it takes to make buildings and to keep them operative and useful over the years. Because it's not only about keeping a building in place and maybe complying, but for it to actually remain relevant as a space we want to live in. There you can see the building in its context of Lake Lugano and the railway underneath, and how different it is to all the buildings around it, which come in terms of character as the result of a palazzo or a more modernist block or something. But the buildings are normally born as something with a clear identity from the beginning. And we think that whenever in the few cases in the cases where we have a client who is willing to be open to these more abstract views and more strategic views about how a building should be formed and should be conceived, we think that quite special things can emerge. We can also get it wrong, as you can see these pillars that project to the north, towards the views, to the lake. They were when they were originally poured, there were some issues, and they had to be demolished. And it was a bit controversial because some people found it a bit, I wouldn't say wasteful, but maybe not necessary. But then at the end, the decision was that they had to come down, and that at the end of the day, the building, even if this was something that some people considered unnecessary, our view was that delivering a building which was not only compliant but also elegant and built to a really high standard, would allow it to stand the test of time for longer. So this is more as an anecdote, but you can see this guy who was really proud of in his action of having to demolish this otherwise very nice pitched in situ cast pillars. And that's I thought I could give you like a closer look of his face. He's trying to, I don't know, there's something in his eyes about it. I don't know if he was proud or felt a bit of some sort of imposing sentiment that had been given this task. It was only a few of them which had to be redone. Okay, then second topic is building and topographies. These are two words that we are again very very used to as both as practicing architects and students of architecture. They're like the staple of what we do. And again, here we're in two very different contexts. One of the one on the left is Tenia in Switzerland, not too far away from the site of the first project I talked about. And this other one is Lake Chapala in Mexico, very close to my hometown, and the largest lake in Mexico. So whereas in Switzerland, the lake is almost a ubiquitous identity of a city or a region. In Mexico, lakes are are not as they don't, although there's of course too many, they don't, you know, they don't play such an important part in the almost cultural conception or the imaginary of a place. In this case, it's a house. It's a house that we, for some reason, decided to name it the Pyramid House. Hopefully, quite obvious why. And the other project is a still unrealized project of a landscape hotel in the, not next to the lake, but actually in the very steep mountains, just a few hundred meters behind. So here we were confronted with two quite different ideas. One of them is the house, the Pyramid House, even though it's in a super mountainous context, it's on a relatively flat land. Whereas the other, as you can see on the side plan, the main challenge with this building was how to create space that not only was physically possible within the slope and the steep landscape, but actually not only as an issue to be dealt with, but actually and hopefully as an important part of its identity as a building. So in one case, on this relatively flat landscape, the building becomes the topography. Let's say it like that. Even though when I say topography, we're talking about an operation of basically how a typology or what effect can have the massing or the volume of a house in the eventual typology or how spaces within it are articulated. Whereas on the other one, as I said before, was the thing is how to render space useful in this very steep landscape. These were projects developed, I mean, not in completely different periods at the office, but for some reason now we're trying to bring them together until within the shish kebab of the second point, which is building and topographies. But this is the interesting thing, that all of these things I'm saying, they're not. I'm not just recounting things we have been conscious about all the time, and now it's only my task to share it with you. But actually, it's looking back at our work and understanding how these more fluid and invisible processes really, are the results of something shared, and again, this not only interest but these curiosities about the. That are the result of all these cultural elements we think are at the basis of our practice. So you can see the one on the left is born out of in a flat land, and then how this L shape it's always a function. The massing of a house is always a function of its plan figure and the vertical figure or the elevational figure. Whereas on the other one, the equivalent drawing of this ground floor is really just this series of also L-shaped elements driven deep into the rocky and steep landscape, just to hopefully have any possibility of providing flat space. So we talk about topography, but we talk about flatness, because flatness is quite important in architecture as well. So you can see, without going too much into detail, as this ground floor on the house on the left reaches the apex of this pyramid or this pointy L shape. Different things with the volume and how instead of having flat ceilings, there are parts where the house actually is two-story, that the ceiling or the separation between the two floors is flat. But then in the rest of the areas, the space at ground floor really benefits from this shifting spatial profile from the inside. And on the other case, you see how this our strategy was, instead of providing the typical elements. This is a landscape hotel, maybe not thought for families or big families, but it's something this place is like less than 1 hour away from one of the biggest cities in Mexico, and it has always been a weekend place to escape the city, and it has one of the best weathers, not only in Mexico but in the world perhaps. So it has always been identified with this almost oasis quite near to the city, where you can go and just enjoy the views and the weather mainly. But going back to the topography, we realized that instead of consolidating the things, the elements that make up a hotel, like the bed where you sleep and where you wash, and where you might maybe sit and watch TV in a more conventional case, or write a letter, for people who still write letters, might be. And we realized that a direct result of the topographical intervention was to actually dismember this thing that normally you get in a very compact package in a hotel room, and actually do, as there was no problem with density or anything, to maximize the surface, basically to arrange it in such a way that it didn't result in the most compact envelope, but actually by doing the opposite, it could benefit more from the glorious weather conditions. So it was a good escape from this constant situation we find ourselves in as architects, that compactness and density is a way, is the thing is the goal. In this case, we could permit to take quite the opposite attitude. And yeah, that's it. I mean, it's quite evident how this quite almost diametrically opposing view of building as a topography, in one of them given by the roof of the building, or the figure of the model of the figure of the volume, whereas on the other one was the way in which a building almost on pilotis actually related to the really almost dire topography underneath. And yeah, this is perhaps more visible in this view, where you can see the pitch roof, and then you can see the pitch, call it, I don't know, ground condition, or the pitched feet of this building. You can see that they have incredibly different tectonic conceptions, and in the case of the hotel, we made this pilotis, or these legs, actually the main tectonic element, not only to negotiate with the ground, but actually once we were off the ground, they became the main tectonic expression, the main compositive element in the thing. Whereas on the other house, in the pyramid house, you can see that this is one of the spaces that is it's flat on the ground, but then the consequences of the volume really become, in this case, the most important spatial determinant condition, which is this pitch roof, quite dramatic, that mirrors the. I mean, we never follow these slightly over romantic things, that if you're in the mountains and you build something that, as a metaphor of the mountains, we don't normally operate in this way, and we're much more interested in things like regulations and planning cultures and all of that, to try to find these from apparently boring or not particularly exciting conditions, to find a case to enrich the architectural process. This is a detail of that, how, and then that's a beautiful thing, that once you get started in this, like gradually consolidating narrative, then you realize at some point, and I think this is particularly interesting to be discussed with students. How once there is something going on, let's say it like that, in the project, then you realize that at some point this like snowball, this nebula of interest brought together begin to take a life of their own. And then we realize that a passage from the street into the garden should not be what we would normally do, perhaps as a metal gate with some sort of elegance, or take it as an opportunity to come up with a design. Let's call it design, to use design to solve pragmatic issues. But actually, in this case, it became we realized that almost the project was asking for this door to be secret, so to speak, and to be made of concrete. And this thing opened up a new chapter in terms of tectonic complexity. And at the end of the day, it's not only an anecdote for the project, but it's a way of these ideas for buildings. At some point they need to feed themselves from congruence and from coherence with the ideas at their heart. This is also something slightly anecdotic, but Dario had that year, when the house was already well under construction, he had a trip to Japan. And he came across this, I would like to think, this almost like vernacular or almost traditional way of doing a pathway. And it's something that perhaps if we had seen this in Switzerland or in Mexico or somewhere else, we would have found it interesting and peculiar, but perhaps not to the degree, because of this perhaps disconnection between the place, the setting, and the almost tectonic culture. So he came back with this idea, and he said we should try something like this in a more Swiss way. And this became like a sub project, like a project within the project, where we looked at the materials that were available at hand, and we spoke to people, and this made us realize that there's a world of people working with this type of materials and all of that. And he went to the yard, and he picked by hand this kind of rocks. It's something maybe that in Japan people would go to the fish market early in the morning and identify the tunas that one would like to buy. Well, in this case, it were the stones that were very clearly labeled things, thankfully, and they were brought to the thing. And actually, I don't have a final image, but it's we did. I think we have it on the website, but we did a version of this sort of composite pathways made of the same material, but different instances and different scales of basically putting rocks together and gravel. We enjoy a lot this kind of thing. So there's the serious process behind the project, and it's a kind of architect's hat that one needs to have on to be able to go through all the obstacles and all the main development of a project. But it's a very beautiful thing when you encounter these things normally towards the end or in the middle of the process, actually are more joyful and more can be more like spontaneous or unexpected in some way. And at the end of the day, they might play quite an important role in the building as a whole at the end. Okay, third point and last is this one called elemental space, which is something that we last year, when we were about to begin a studio, a second year studio at Kingston University. As it happens everywhere, one needs to come up with a brief and a vision for the studio to be presented to the students and to the rest of the faculty. And we realized, I mean, we always talk about the things we're interested about and all that, but then we realized that we came up with this incredibly simple couple of words. And we realized that that's the kind of thing that we had been trying to achieve in the years before that, which is a very, I think we've talked about it, and it must be a mix of the things that we can still remember of when we were both students, but also of all the things we weren't conscious about back then, and that have been the result of the decisions and the situations that we have encountered in our lives from that magical and beautiful point of being students. And then our job as teachers of architecture is to try to codify all of these things that we talk about in our professional, everyday, but also things that maybe recall a deeper past in our lives when we are in that incredible period of being students, and somehow again re-synthesize it into a brief and into a vision for the studio that can be something really strongly related to us. At the end of the day, we think that as architects, regardless of the theme of the studio or even the identities of the teachers, the important thing when one studies is to learn first of all the basics of architecture, and then hopefully a bit more, as that like 5 or 6 year period in one's life before one embarks into more like into the next stage, which is professional practice in many cases. But anyway, this simple thing, elemental space, we said, wow, it's incredibly simple and elemental, as the word says. But we realized that was a bit like the agenda, the open motto that we wanted to for a studio to be known for, and for us to use it as the basis of teaching architecture. Yeah, so that was a project from last year. We found a relatively empty island, a man-made island in the Netherlands, and we came up with this idea of making an adaptive master plan. So we started with a circle in the middle, which was a road, and then we divided the island like in a pizza sort of style, and we gave to each student a slice that was the same at the center, but then obtained the particular condition around the island depending on where they were. And the brief, maybe less important, was spaces for artists to live and to work and to show their work. A bit recalling the need for space to be flexible and to be adaptable, almost as a sustainable precondition of architecture for this day and age. And the idea was that every student every week developed their project, and they need to keep like a different degree of awareness with how the projects immediately next to theirs, and then in a second degree, 2 plots removed from theirs, we're developing as well each week. And the idea was for this incredibly rigid master plan every week to loosen up and to become like an organism of its own. So everyone had to work on their own, but to react to how the space was developing around them. And anyway, these are some simplified abstractions of this of the results under this mantra of elemental space, and how to identify a very finite and very almost almost reduced set of conditions to develop a complex and flexible brief, but always trying to find a strong consequence between typological decisions and even the figure of buildings, and how space can be determined by it. So there was something where we said form doesn't follow function, but it's quite the opposite. We need to look at function in such an open and critical way that it can be affected by the physical condition of architecture around it in a way more than what is conventional. So that was last year, and this year we did something completely different, and we worked with a slightly surreal brief, which was combining airports and hotels. So we came up with a brief of saying students have to replace a building in an airport, and this had to be both a terminal for people to board the planes and also a hotel. And a hotel based on the current condition, on the current contingency of COVID, not as something that hopefully will be will be done with in the next half a year or year, but actually as something that might be something more, unfortunately, more normal than we expect in the future. And now we call it COVID, and then in the next 5 years it will be something else that will cause a similar profound effect on the way we live our lives and the way we reorganize our lives. At the end of the day, we'll have to work and we will have to sleep and eat and relax, hopefully. And as architects, this is the right time to look at, we think, at how a new model can emerge from this undesirable but very real and very stubborn situation that probably, as I said, won't disappear. So yeah, this is a project that hasn't been, these projects are in the process of being completed over the next weeks. And your students, where in the year we are, but again, try to instigate this idea of clear vision for structure and for the elements of architecture, structures, services, installations, partitions, and all the way to even to furnishing and to things that we can just change by pushing or pulling a 30-kilo object, and how all of this in different ways really at the stuff or the elements with which within which we live our lives and with which we as architects execute our work and contribute to society. So anyway, you can see, without going in depth, how this clear and primary structural decisions will then affect the way typologies can emerge from them, always with an acuteness for contingency, but with a strong penchant for flexibility and for change, because we don't know what's going to come in 5 years. This is a different project completely. They all had the same site, and they all had a 60 by 60 by 25 meter building to develop. So we're very excited about how this very fixed set of constraints can result in so many different visions. And this is where we think relating our work as architects and as educators become a virtuous circle with one. They not only influence the other, but they empower or they push the other in a very, we think, very, very productive cycle. This is a project not from this year, not the last, but actually from 2 years ago, when we were still identifying this kind of teaching vision of elemental space. We recently published a monography, a small monography of our work with Quart Verlag in Switzerland. And this was also a very important moment for us, because it's a small book, and we know very well all the contents within it, and even the way in which we normally present projects. But the task of having, first of all, to select 10 projects that more or less depict the situation or the condition in which we work and this particular setup of being in 2 different countries was really interesting. It's in a similar way in which giving a lecture is interesting, that one is to look back and say, okay, we've done that, and then we've done that project, and then we did this too at the same time. Partially conscious about the other things we talk about and we do. But it's really when, at this point, when one has to bind together, say, maybe not all of our projects, but 10 that somehow give a decent idea of things we're interested in, was very important. So I guess the conclusion is that it's going back to things I was saying at the beginning, that the way we work as architects, anyway, as a young, relatively recent practice, is that there's things change incredibly quick, and they and this nebula of cultures, identities, interests, and curiosities. I mean, it's almost like a live organism that is in constant sort of questioning of what one is, and even more prosaic questions as why should someone, a potential client, should come to us and not to the practice next door. It's like an ongoing sort of life of our practice and of our work as architects. So we're always busy at the end of the day giving our services to people and clients, but there is in the background always this constant, on the one hand, an attempt to reaffirm who we are, but on the other one, this continuous questioning of who we are and why we work in a certain way and why we are a bit different than maybe others. So with this slightly puzzling thought, I conclude my talk.
Thanks, Diego. That was fantastic. It was great to hear about your range of projects, as well as some of your teaching and your thoughts, as you mentioned there. We've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm going to pass over to Damien.
Okay. Has there been people listening? Because I can only see 3 of you, and maybe
I know. Yeah, there's definitely people watching.
Okay.
And they've been sending in some questions, so
sure. Yeah.
We'll kind of have a discussion here.
Yeah, I just have a few here. So the first one is, seeing in your slides different images of isometric drawings and models. How does your design process usually work? Do you usually experiment with drawings or model making, or how does that come about?
Yeah, there's something as well a bit peculiar there, in that we make models and we sketch, but I mean we listen to lectures, and we're part of we know many architects in a similar condition to ours, or older guys, and they're always either virtuous model makers or incredible sketchers and all of that, and and when I think the thing with Dario and I, once we of course we're making models most of the time and producing a range of pieces to hopefully be able to advance our projects. We're not precious about any particular medium, and we're proud sometimes when we make a really ugly model or a terrible sketch, that as long as it's useful in its task of capturing something that maybe it's more difficult with words, we think that's the job done. So I think one day we should do a gallery of our ugly sketches, and yeah, I mean, yeah, we do them as I don't know if most practices or not, but we have a really unassuming relationship with them now. So most of our sketches end up in the bin, but the important thing is that the idea or the conversation that they helped to articulate somehow remains, if it was a good one. Otherwise, that conversation ends up in the bin as well.
Second question here is, how would you compare your office in London to Switzerland, and is there a difference in the way you approach your work in each studio?
Yeah, I think they are notably distinct in that, as I mentioned earlier, normally the people who work for us are very young, and not many, and most of the times they come from say in Switzerland, they might come from the academia in Mendrisio, and in London they might be, say, old students of ours from Kingston, or people in a almost equivalent situation. So the offices are incredibly different. Even the atmosphere and the way we the work culture is, I would like to think, is very related and very specific to, say, to the London or the Lugano studios, and we think this is something quite positive for the thing. So it's not, needless to say, we're not a big practice or anything, but in many cases there are practices that have branches about venues in different places, but it's in a more stable or in a more equiparable way between them, whereas however small our practices, our studios are, they're quite Swiss and quite London, so to speak.
I've just one more question here, and you sort of touched on it earlier, but maybe you could just expand. How important has teaching been to your studio, and do you think it influences your work?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's there's no shadow of a doubt about it, and we would like to think it's one of the main reasons why we teach. We don't see ourselves as having, being in possession of such an important body of knowledge that we need to share it, but it's more about this cycle, of offering something to others and acquiring so much from others in the process. And we think that the way architectural education, for example, in the UK, has traditionally been based on, is really good in this respect, because it's not incredibly hierarchical as it might be in other countries, where there's a figure of the professor, and then there's the assistants, and then there's such a I wouldn't say disconnection, but there's such hierarchy difference between the parties to education, whereas something we enjoy a lot in the UK is that one can lead a studio in a university, being relatively young and unknown, and this makes, I wouldn't say a more democratic process, but it makes a much more personal and almost like a feedback system in a much stronger way than what we have experienced in other countries. So at this point that we have been teaching for some years, we don't see ourselves not teaching, say, in the following few years, because it has become, of course, we can be fired tomorrow, but but how important it has become to our practice, and it's not only a professional thing, but as our identity as architects, that it's incredibly productive.
That's great. I think that's all of our questions. So I'd like to say thank you again for joining us and taking some time out of your busy schedule. I know you mentioned you've been really busy recently, so that's good. I'd also just like to say, as it's our last lecture of the year, and the last lecture as us as a committee and president, so just a big thank you to everyone who's accepted an invitation to lecture at 5710 this year. I think we've had 13 or 14 lectures, which for a year that's not gone quite as we planned, I think it's gone as well as we could have made it. I'd also like to say thank you to our committee, who have been working really hard behind the scenes, as well as all 101, I think, members we now have this year, for joining us every week for our lectures. And finally, good luck to Andrew, Harry and Liam, who will be next year's presidents. We're excited to hand over the baton to them next year. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Diego.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I had a great time, and it's a pity I couldn't be there with you. But anyway, thanks.
Hopefully next time.
Yeah, next time.
All right, that is me.